Gracias. Buenos días. I would like to begin by thanking Dennis and Christy and Alejandra and all the people who were involved in helping to organize this conference. I know it took many hours of work, and I am very grateful to the Lord for people like Dennis and everyone who helped for willing to take on such a noble cause. For me personally, it is a great honor to have this opportunity to share with you this morning. I'm deeply humbled and I feel unworthy. My wife and I are slowly, little by little, learning Spanish, but we are constantly traveling back to the States to look after my 88-year-old mother who is ill and who also speaks mostly German. So this does not help us any with our Spanish. My best phrase in Espanol is, quisiera un té frío sin azúcar, por favor. So I've got that down pretty well. We are trying hard, so pray for us. I've chosen to title my message this morning, The Cost of Christian Commitment. It is not easy to be a consistent, obedient Christian in this fallen world, which is only certain to become more and more wicked and rebellious until Jesus Christ returns. To be obedient consistently requires strong determination and perseverance. My favorite Bible verse, which I regularly meditate on, and from which I draw much strength and hope, is found in the book of James, chapter 1, verse 12. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. The fact is, God rewards obedience, commitment, and perseverance, especially when it occurs under difficult circumstances and with opposition. I'd like to share with you just a few examples of the price of Christian commitment and obedience and the importance of perseverance. These are lessons I've learned from my own family and from my personal experiences over the years. I am the son of European immigrants and was born in the United States a few years after my parents emigrated. My father grew up in Croatia, and toward the end of World War II, he and his family were faced with a very difficult decision. They were given about 1 to 2 days' notice that they had to choose sides with either the Nazis or the communists, because those two groups were converging on the villages where my father lived. And so my father and his family and their closest relatives, being Christians, decided they did not want part of either. And so the only option they really had was to run for their lives and leave everything behind. And that's what they did. They became refugees. They had had a very nice farm. They had a good living. They lost it all. But it saved their lives. Eventually, my father traveled through Hungary and then into the mountains of Austria, where they were able to hide out until the war ended a few months later. One of my father's uncles decided to go back into Croatia after the war because he was a man of wealth and he could not deal with leaving all of his material things behind. But once in the country, he was detained and he was never able to get out. We only received a letter from him maybe once a year or so. But my father and his family were fortunate. They made it. And once he graduated from high school, he and his cousins were able to go into Germany because Germany was rebuilding after the war and they needed manpower. And because my father and his cousins were able to speak not only Croatian and Russian, but also German, they were able to get in. And my father's goal at that time was to save up enough money so that he could eventually come to the United States, which had been his childhood dream. Well, while in Germany, he met my mother, who grew up during World War II under Hitler and had a difficult life. But the interesting thing is, in her small village where she grew up, it was a village of 300 or 400 people, there was only one outspoken Nazi, and he was the school teacher. He was put there to influence the children and to indoctrinate them. Well, it just so happened that my mother's father, my grandfather, was very outspoken against Hitler, to the point where his friends told him, "Heinrich, you need to be quiet. You're going to get us all killed." But he continued to take a stand and speak out. And eventually, what they thought happened was the school teacher reported him to the secret police. And one day, the Gestapo showed up in the mayor's office looking for my grandfather. Now, fortunately, the mayor of the village was a good friend of the family. In fact, his daughter and my mother were best friends. So he sent the Gestapo in one direction and then told my grandfather what was going on, and he went in the other direction, and so nothing ever happened. Really, God protected my grandfather. But he and my mother's family lived in constant fear. I don't know if fear is the right word, but they always had to be careful because they knew that they were being watched, especially toward the end of the war. I'm saying all this to demonstrate there is a commitment with doing what is right. It would have been much easier for my grandfather to be quiet, but instead he put his life on the line. And my father and his family also, they fled. They left everything behind. But God blessed them, and they were able to survive and eventually make it to the United States. And had they not taken that path, I wouldn't be here today. So I am thankful to the Lord for that, if nothing else. Well, when I was growing up in the United States, I was born, by the way, about 3 years after my parents got married and came to the United States. And many of my father's cousins and relatives also emigrated to the United States. So as I was growing up, usually once or twice a year, we would have family get-togethers. And I remember from a very young age hearing them talk about what they went through during the war. And I was fascinated by it. And as I got a little bit older, I remember thinking, how could it be possible that a country like Germany that had so many Christians in it, that something like this could have happened? And finally, when I was 11 years old, I was sitting in my classroom, and our teacher that year was teaching world history, and we spoke about World War II. And I remember silently praying to the Lord. I said, "Lord, if anything were to ever happen again, like what happened in Nazi Germany and in Europe during World War II, I promise to you I will take a stand no matter what the cost." And I really meant it as a young man. Now, I never thought that the Lord would take me up on that commitment, but I do believe the Lord hears the prayers of young people when they are prayed with a sincere heart. Well, a few years later, I was now 16 years old, and I was in a very, very bad car accident. I should have been killed. I made the mistake of letting my friend drive my car, and he wasn't paying attention. He lost control and ran off the road, hit a large rock, and flipped over, and I was thrown out through the window. And once I realized that I had survived, that I would live, of course I was thankful for that, but I knew I was a mess. My face was completely mutilated. I looked like a monster. You couldn't even tell what I looked like, and there was blood everywhere. And as I was in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, I prayed to the Lord and I said, God, if you ever allow me to look halfway normal again, I promise I will do anything for you. The following day after my surgeries, a number of elders came from our church to our house to pray over me. And they too were taken aback by my appearance and how bad I looked. But 1 week later, you could hardly tell that anything had happened to me. The Lord healed me. It was amazing. Even non-Christians in school were amazed at how the Lord healed me. And so I remembered that I had made that commitment, and the Lord healed me and brought me back to normal. I assume I looked halfway normal because my wife married me. At least back then I did. Maybe now I don't, but she married me. A number of years later, the Lord opened the door for me to work in a key position in our state government. I was living in the state of Indiana, which, by the way, today is their biggest day of the year. It's the Indianapolis 500 race is being run right now. I worked for the lieutenant governor of that state, and my position was that of Europe and Middle East trade specialist. And my job entailed traveling overseas, working with our foreign embassies to try to increase exports from Indiana in order to create more jobs in our state. And so I met a lot of very interesting people at our embassies, and also many international business leaders, especially in the fields of energy and medicine. And sometimes I would spend 3 or 4 days at a time with these people, so I got to know some of them quite well. And we would talk about all kinds of things, including international economics and politics, and sometimes we'd talk about religious developments in the world as well. And I met very, very interesting people, some of whom were Christians, others who were not. And some of those people who were not were involved in what today I refer to as the One World movement. They were in favor of the idea of one government over the entire world, where there would no longer be countries as we know of them today, but the entire world, all the countries of the world would be merged under one umbrella and one world economic system. And the problem I had, among other things, was that many of these same people that were in favor of this agenda, A, did not like conservative Jews, and B, were not fond of Christians. And after what my parents went through during World War II, you can understand why I was concerned about this. I began to think, what if there is a world government and these kinds of people are in charge? What would that mean for Bible-believing Christians and for Jews? And it seemed to me as if history was trying to repeat itself. I am a student of history, and it's amazing how people don't learn from past mistakes. The same things keep happening over and over. And eventually, I had so much information that I believe the Lord wanted me to take a stand, to do something with this information. I remember the commitment that I had made to the Lord as an 11-year-old and again as a 16-year-old. And so I began to pray, God, what am I to do with this information? Do I just stand on a street corner and start telling people about it, or where do I even begin? And within a couple of weeks of praying about that, the Lord began to open the doors. It was nothing I did, it just happened. It was truly amazing. At the time, my best friend was the assistant to the Secretary of State of our state of Indiana. And he helped to lead a Bible study group that met in the state capitol building. And he asked me to come and share it before their group. And so I did. I went there and I talked to them about some of the things I was learning and even presented some evidence and documentation. And as a result of that, a number of state legislators and Christian political figures who were also in that Bible study group, they then invited me to come and share before their groups. And it just began to happen. And this went on for about 10 months or so. And then one day, unexpectedly, I was called into the office of one of the leaders of our state commerce department, and he began to ask me some detailed questions. And he asked if it was in fact true that I had been speaking out against this idea of world government and things such as the New Age movement and so forth. And I said, yes, that is true. And he asked me some other questions, and I provided him with the answers to the best of my ability. And after maybe 20 minutes to half an hour or so, he cut me off and he said, as long as you work for this administration, you will not talk about any of these things to any groups, regardless of their size, whether they are Christian or non-Christian. Is that understood? And I was so stunned, I didn't even know what to say. And before I could respond, he said, you've been a tremendous asset to our administration, and we do not want to lose you, but the choice is yours. And that's how the meeting ended. So my job was on the line because of this stand that I had taken. I remember walking back to my office and looking out the window, and I couldn't believe this had just happened. And I wondered what it meant for my future and what I should do. And I think in the back of my mind, I already had a pretty good idea of what the Lord wanted me to do. But I wanted to pray about it first. I didn't want to do anything rash. And so I decided to take one final trip overseas with the Secretary of State, who invited me to go with him. This trip was already planned before that meeting. And it was a trip to Finland, Russia, and China. And so I thought this would give me time to reflect and pray. And also, I smuggled some Bibles into Russia. I thought I might as well make this trip count if it might be the last trip I ever take. And so a Messianic group, Jewish group in Indianapolis, who were friends of mine, they found out I was planning to go there, and they asked me if I would take some Bibles in with me. And so after praying about it, I did. That's a whole other story. That would take about an hour to tell you about that trip. But everything went well, and when I was on my way back, I was sitting in the airport in San Francisco, and the Lord gave me the words to write in a letter of resignation. And so I wrote it. I came back to Indiana, and I submitted it to the leaders there, giving them 3 weeks' notice that I would be leaving my job. And I told them that I felt that I needed to stand firm on this because as a private citizen, I have a right to tactfully speak out about these things, especially in light of what my parents had gone through. And I told them that I believe I needed to write a book to document these developments so that people would believe me and so that others could become aware of it. And so that was in 1985. And up until that time, my wife and I, we had very easy lives. We had wonderful lives. We enjoyed success in our careers. It was amazing. But from the time I left my job to take a stand for the Lord, we became familiar with the idea of spiritual warfare. The things that happened to us, over one 8-month period, for example, my wife was in 3 car accidents. On the one occasion, our car was completely destroyed. Another time, my father's business in Ohio burned to the ground, a complete loss. And that hurt us as well because my parents were helping us some at the time. Then I became ill for 2 years. I had something like chronic mononucleosis. If you know what mononucleosis is, I had something similar to that for 2 years. I was so tired and worn out I could barely function. But many people were praying for us. And with God's help, we kept moving forward. And while some of these bad things were happening to us, God was doing some wonderful things in our lives as well. For example, because of all these things that had happened, we were faced one day with not enough money to pay a bill. This was on a Friday evening, and the bill was due, I believe, on Tuesday, martes. See, I know a little bit of Spanish. And so my wife asked me, what are we going to do? We do not have the $200 to pay this bill. And I told her, I believe the Lord knows of our circumstances. He knows we are not lazy people. We are working very hard. We're doing everything we can. Let's ask Him for it to provide. And so we said a simple prayer asking for the Lord to provide these $200. A couple days later, we were in church on a Sunday morning, and my wife, who sang in the choir, went to get her choir folder, and she opened it up. And inside was an envelope, and it had our names written on the outside, Gary and Audrey. She opened up the envelope, and there was a little note, and it said, "Dear Gary and Audrey, God has blessed me tremendously over the years. I just want to share this small gift with you. Remember, always trust in the Lord, and He will provide." And enclosed along with the note was $200 exactly. And we hadn't told one person. Nobody knew about this. And there was no name signed at the end. To this day, we still do not know where that money came from. And that was only one time. There were other occasions where similar things happened. So that was a tremendous encouragement to us that the Lord was with us and that He would help us to see it through. Now, before I get ahead of myself, I need to mention to you that along the way, I had been invited to join two organizations that were directly involved in trying to bring about this one world government system. So I actually got an inside look. So it's not just secondhand information, it's things that I know for sure to be true that are happening. For example, I have held in my hands a copy of a world constitution for world government. Now, it is a prototype, and they are still fine-tuning it, but it does exist. It spells out the plans for a world police force, a world parliament, a world economic system, how the world is to be divided into regions for the purpose of administration, and many other things. This organization has already sponsored and put together 14 meetings of a provisional world parliament. This is like a dress rehearsal for the real thing. The purpose of this one particular organization, which was called the World Constitution and Parliament Association, I believe is to create the impression that this movement to bring about world government is really a democratic effort and that it is coming from the grassroots up. They want to make it look very natural, like this is something that the people of the world want. But in the meantime, certain people in high places are working from the top down as well. So they are working on this agenda from the bottom up and from the top down. For 4 years, I was able to communicate with the Secretary General of that organization and collect hundreds of pages of documents. And some of those documents are reproduced in my book toward the back so that you can look at it for yourself, including some of the personal letters that I received from them. It took 6 long years for me to finish up my book. I thought it would take 2 years. It took 6 years. And I thank the Lord for a godly wife who stayed with me. Many wives would have thought their husbands are crazy for leaving a good job with the government to write a book about these kinds of things. But she stuck with me. And finally, in 1992, the book came out. And I thought, I'm done. I've done my job. I wrote this book documenting these things. Little did I know that this would just be the beginning for us. Because the book, it became a bestseller within a few months and opened up many doors for me to do radio and television talk shows. And so that's really the main way how this message went out in the United States and in some other countries, was through the media. And I still continue to do those to this day. But it was a time unlike any other in our lives that I will remember the Lord's faithfulness. There were so many times along the way when I was working on my book that I felt like quitting, and I fell short, and I felt like I was failing the Lord, but He was patient and long-suffering and merciful, and because of that, we were able to move forward and get the job done. Now, as I mentioned, the book, En Route to Global Occupation, is available in Spanish. We had it translated into Spanish, and it is available back at our book table and also People can go to our website and find out how to get it. Our website is www.garykaw.org. In other words, simply my name, GARYKAH.org. Our journey has not always been easy, but with God's help, we will continue to follow him in obedience. While difficult at times, our lives have been incredibly rewarding from a spiritual standpoint, and we thank the Lord for his enduring faithfulness. If we are willing to sacrifice and persevere, God can do amazing things. It's not because of us, it's because of God, but we do have to be obedient to him. As I begin to wrap up, I'd like to leave you with a few closing spiritual thoughts and admonitions regarding our responsibilities as Christians. First of all, it is important that we, all of us, draw near to Christ. Develop a close personal relationship and walk with the Lord. Abide in him. That means not just saying a short prayer in the morning and then not thinking about God the rest of the day. It means walking with him throughout the day, talking with him, bringing your burdens to him, and also praising him throughout the day for his goodness in your life. Jesus said in John 15:5, I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. But apart from me, you can do nothing. We need the power of the Lord in our lives to be effective. Don't expect to just be aware of the Lord, but not to really know him and still accomplish much for him in your life. It won't work. Secondly, be discerning. Study and seek to understand God's word. Also, with God's help, develop an awareness of what is taking place in the world around you. In short, know the truth. Otherwise, you are living in a false reality and are wasting your life. Imagine living 40 or 50 or 60 years of your life and then suddenly discovering that the whole time you were wrong and that you were promoting ideas and teachings to people that were lies from Satan. It is so important that we know the truth and that we stand on that truth. Without truth, we're nothing. We're just all living a lie. So it is important to know the truth of the Word of God, of the Bible, and also to know what is going on around us, to get to the bottom of things so that we are not mistakenly promoting activities that we should not be promoting. In the last days, we know from Scripture that very deceptive times would come, and I believe we are living in those days now. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus warns us to be discerning because the evil would become so great and the things would be so confusing that even the elect would be deceived if that were possible. This is Jesus who said this. In other words, people would even come claiming to be Christians but teaching false things. So just because someone claims to be a Christian, you cannot always believe what they are saying. They may even be well-intentioned, but they can still be wrong. So we need spiritual discernment, and that can only come from the Lord. Be a champion for the truth and impact eternity for Christ. Make that one of your goals. Thirdly, prayerfully determine what it is that God is calling you to do, his special purpose for your life, and then pursue your calling passionately with complete abandon and all-out commitment. Ephesians 5:15-17 says, Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. And in Colossians chapter 3, Paul encourages us with the following powerful words. He said, whatever we are God's representatives, his ambassadors in this world. Romans 12:18 states, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. In other words, if you are persecuted by those around you, let it be because you are living a Christ-like example, not because you are a difficult person to get along with. Whenever possible, genuinely encourage other people, always practicing the golden rule put forth by Jesus, which is, do to others as you would have them do to you. If you are kind and treat others with integrity, and they persecute or hate you despite of this, then at least you have been obedient to the Lord and have a clear conscience. Deep down in their hearts, these people will respect you. My wife was a school teacher for a number of years, and there were some teachers at her school, some of her colleagues, who, quite frankly, were very immoral. They were involved in some activities that I would not even be able to state to you here today what they were doing. And because my wife would not participate with them in some of these things, they spoke badly about her behind her back, and they did not like her. But when they would get into trouble and a crisis would happen in their lives, guess who they would come to for help? My wife. Sometimes they would even ask her to pray with them or for them. In their hearts, they had respect for her because they knew that she was a true Christian and tried to live accordingly. So just because people speak negatively of you does not mean they don't respect you. We as Christians need to stand firm in what is right. And whatever response we get, let that be as it may. We need to live lives of integrity that are worthy of the respect of others. There is a cost to being a faithful follower of Christ, but the Lord will honor and reward our commitment in Him if we do not grow weary in doing good. Finally, I just want to close by saying that I really, truly believe that God has a special purpose for Costa Rica in these last days. Costa Rica is a very strategic country in its location and also because of its people who live here. It has become a melting pot. There are people here from all over the world now. And I believe God may use it as a type of oasis from where His gospel of truth can go forward, and also where perhaps some people who are being persecuted in other places can come to. So be prepared. I believe in the days ahead there may be some Jewish people and some Christians coming from the United States and other places to Costa Rica. And I just ask of you, and the Lord would ask of you, that you live for Him wholeheartedly, that you love Him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and that you will be all that you can be for the Lord and for His glory. Thank you for this opportunity. May God bless each one of you.